Hello and welcome to this week's Wildlife Matters podcast. I'm your host, Nigel Palmer. And in this week's episode, we'll talk to Alana, the co-founder of the Wildlife Care Badge, an initiative that aims to bring the standard level of care in wildlife rescues up to the same level. And I'm really excited to bring you this chat today, as I believe that people who work or volunteer at wildlife rescues deserve respect and recognition for the demanding work they do every day. We all want to see the highest level of care for all wild and companion animals, and on that I am sure you will agree. In this full-length episode, Alana will discuss the ethos of the Wildlife Care Badge. Unfortunately, during the recording, we suffered a power cut at the studio and we lost the first few minutes when Alana introduced herself. We apologise for that. The Wildlife Care Badge has developed a UK wildlife rescuers map that showcases proven wildlife rescues and rehabbers who can confidently offer knowledgeable and high welfare rehabilitative care to wildlife casualties and orphans. This map helps members of the public, vet professionals and other wildlife rehabbers know where to take injured or orphaned wildlife for high welfare care. The Wildlife Care Badge supports wildlife rescues and rehabbers to ensure they have as much support as possible in their efforts, and the wildlife casualties and orphans across the UK always receive the medical and rehabilitative care that they deserve. This includes enabling wildlife rescues and rehabbers to establish strong relationships with vets, helping vet practices grow their wildlife knowledge and adapt their practices to offer reliable medical care to the wildlife they take in. So now, if you're ready, let's dive right in with our first question and say welcome to Alana. So Alana, what was your motivation to develop the Wildlife Care Badge?
So it started because I set up UK Wildlife Transporters in August of 2020. And I set that up because I'd been working with lots of wildlife organisations through Wildscaping Worldwide. And then I'd noticed that there was just a transport gap and it felt a bit pointless. So I set up Transporters, which operates nationwide and works with rescues and vet practices across the UK. And it was very successful pretty much immediately, which meant that I connected with hundreds of rehabbers and vet practices across the UK very quickly. Suddenly, I found myself in a position where I hadn't realised when I set up Transporters how completely unregulated the wildlife rescue industry was then. And since then, Scotland had brought in licensing. But this was back in August 2020. So I had a few experiences, which was a massive learning curve of picking up from people who very well intentioned, but had provided next to no care for the animals that they'd had for a long time, animals in really, really terrible conditions. The experiences they're just too lengthy to name. There were so many from so many different parts of the country. And then I had my own instances of taking wildlife casualties to rescues that had great, really professional sounding names. And I just was very ignorant, basically. And then being told afterwards by those rescues that they actually didn't know anything about the species that I'd taken them to, but they loved animals, so they were giving it a go. And despite all the well intentions, I couldn't live with the idea that I wasn't actually serving the creatures that I was putting in the hours to try and help. So I started reaching out to wildlife rescues and vet practices just to say, I think I can see how we could set up a self-regulation scheme. Do you want to give it a go? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But why don't we give it a try? And that's how it started. So, yeah.
And I totally understand. I guess that's where the wildlife rights side of the Wildlife Care Badge comes from. I mean, they're central to it, but is there anything you want to elaborate more on that, or is that really the roots of it?
It's the roots of it, I suppose. It was very much so. The Wildlife Care Badge was always set up with two aims. The focus of the policy was to enable the proof of welfare standards of wildlife rescues, because that was what was missing. But the dual goal of it was always the well-being for the whole community. And there's actually it launched in February 2022. We were lucky enough that Liz Mullino, who is a top wildlife vet, who was massively a part of creating the badge, we were invited to present the badge at the Secret World Wildlife Rescue Conference in February 2022 on our launch, which was just a great opportunity. And the presentation for that is actually still available on the FAQ page on the Care Badge website. And that talks all about well-being of the whole community. So with those were always the dual motivations. With regards to kind of wildlife rights, it's always been about basically the fact that we're one planet again. So it's about the rights of all of us to thrive. And basically wildlife being recognized as our equals, as with rights that are completely equal to ourselves, the level of treatment that we would expect for ourselves becoming the norm that we would expect to give to a wild creature, especially since we all are born with an innate right over our own minds and bodies. And in wildlife rescue, it's hard because you're facing an emergency situation. So do you step in and ignore suffering or struggling, or do you step in and try and help? But in trying to help, you are taking away the independence, the rights of that creature. So with that in mind, you then have to have, I feel, if you're being honest with yourself and the planet and other creatures, you then have to act with the responsibility that you would expect people to give you. You provide a level of care that you would expect for yourself. So it just became all of that.
Yeah, totally. I get that, because again, it comes back to this all being the same, essentially, doesn't it? And your transporter organization, you've taken an animal to a rescue. Of course, you want it to get the best care, but the standard of care has got to be high quality, as you'd expect for a human if a human goes to hospital. So the next thing I was going to ask about was the rehab, release and transit badge, which I believe is the main badge. It's the main core part of the wildlife care badge. And obviously that's something you've developed. So do you want to go through how you developed it, who with, and what the outcomes were for that, sort of what you wanted from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the development process lasted for a year, and it was very much a development process right up until the very last couple of months. We didn't even know if it was going to launch successfully, if we were going to settle on something. And a lot of people from the beginning really thought that we wouldn't, and we didn't know. It was a real kind of curiosity and exploration to see if it was possible. And it was very much from within the industry itself. So all we knew that we wanted to create was a level of honesty and transparency within the industry, and a space for everything to be a space to create well-being, basically, is the best way to describe it, for humans and wildlife. And those were our core motivations. So we already knew that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We knew that there was all this expert information out there on what standards should really be. And that list, I won't go into it on here, but that list is available on the Wildlife Care Badge website. So all the documents that were already out there, all the protocols that were already out there from RSPCA, from all these great sources, they were already available. There was no framework to prove them and enforce them. So, or to be transparent within that space. So that's what we were looking to create. We also really wanted it was always about the industry self-regulating itself. So absolutely everyone was welcome the whole way through all the development processes. We tried to make people aware of it as much as possible. Everyone was open to attend every single meeting. There became a core group who really got committed and attended it and shaped most of it, but everyone was always welcome all the way through. We did have really strict kind of behavior requirements all the way through so that there wasn't any infighting and scrapping and nastiness to help make it happen. But the development process was a real experience, and we ended up settling on 2 badges, which was a brilliant idea of a couple of the rehabbers who were involved, Lucy Still being one of them. So one of the main issues with wildlife rescue is that there can be a big divide over euthanasia versus keeping wild animals captive. And the reality is there isn't much research out there. It's an industry that appears to be very much in its infancy, and there can be very strong opinions on both sides. The Wildlife Care Badge was very much about operating within the law and reflecting the law, not about forcing an opinion. One of the moments we realised that the badge might actually happen was when Lucy Steele and another rehabber managed to come up with a suggestion that suggested 2 badges. One for those who didn't think that captive disabled or captive full stop was acceptable, and those who did want to operate as sanctuaries. So that's the rehab release and transit badge was the first, where you didn't have to operate as a sanctuary. It was just about rehab and release. And then that was just based on common sense, what was just really obvious, which is, do you have a knowledge? The end framework just became, do you have a knowledge of the species you're rehabbing enough that you know what you're looking at and what you're trying to do? Do you have a suitable environment? And then do you work with a vet? Because that's essential. And then that's it, really. It was really a very, very simple thing. It was just, it hadn't been done before.
But that's really important, isn't it? Because as you say, the sort of wildlife rescue industry, and I'm not even sure it fully qualifies as that. There are some very big ones, and there's an awful lot of small and I'm not taking anything away from them by saying it's not an industry, but it's cottage type industry in most cases. But within that, standards can be incredibly variable, and it is all about delivering the best care or pain relief or whatever is appropriate. You know, if you've got an RTA, you've got to deal with that in the best manner possible, and having access to vets or vets on site. Everybody's got different situations, but it's very hard within any group of people who are all believing they're doing their utmost and the best that they can do to bring a level of standard in. You know, the euthanasia is a massive debate, and there are strong opinions both ways, and there always have been. So the long-term care badge is essentially bringing standards to those who then decide that they are going to look after the animals in a sanctuary type situation.
Yeah.
In essence, that's the difference.
Yeah, they're almost identical. In fact, they are identical until you add in the long-term care badge has just a lot of extra pages that specifically focus around long-term captives, long-term residents. It's very much a work in progress at the minute, and we don't know when it will launch. So the reason for the wildlife care badge is that the law enables and allows captive wild animals, if there's an argument that they would not survive if released, or they would be inhibited compared to other animals on their release. So the law enables and allows it. Therefore, within an unregulated industry, we wanted to ensure that those animals had someone checking that they had all the basic rights that we hold for ourselves as humans, the right social requirements that we need, the right enrichment, like a purpose to live, I suppose, the quality of life that we expect for ourselves. Part of what that looks like is a higher level of accountability and an even stronger working relationship with a vet, where decisions on euthanasia are made. They have to be made by the vet and rehabber together, and they has to be an understanding of what they're looking at for factors to make that decision. So euthanasia would never be off the table. It would be continuing to be aware that it's about the quality of life for the animals, and are they exhibiting behaviours that show that they have a good quality of life, and the individual of each animal case by case. But the reality is that it needs a vast amount of research, and it's absolutely nowhere near settled on and finished, because once you really look at the required space, the required enrichment, the decision you're really making for a creature, then you really have to put it up to the highest standard. And that requires a huge amount of research. So it's very much still in the developmental stage for that.
It's a huge time commitment and cost and long term in quite a lot of cases. And as you rightly said, enrichment and making sure the quality of life for that animal is at least equal to what it had. I was with a charity that was very active in opposing zoos and know more about the behaviours and when animals get bored and how it can have a massive impact on physical and mental, emotional, everything. They just become shells, albeit within beautiful bodies, can be a really difficult route to go down. But some people do it and do achieve it. But I can understand why the second one, the long-term badge, is taking a lot longer to bring together, because there's a whole host of additional things you've got to consider and get into place and agreed, isn't there? If I were a small general wildlife rescue, the benefit to me and my rescue, but most importantly, the animals, of joining and me taking a wildlife care badge. Can you summarize that
Yeah,
as you can?
absolutely. There's a page on the website actually called WCB Holder Benefits, I think, that lays it out probably more eloquently than I'm going to manage here, but I'll give it a go. So there's two levels of benefits to being a badge holder, especially if you are small, if you're quite a small independent rehabber, which I really celebrate all rehabbers. I couldn't do the work. I think it's astonishing. And I have a huge level of respect. And I have a part of the badge was absolutely set up, and it's been a growing motivation to unite the divide between what's become big centres and small independent rehabbers, and kind of keeping it in everyone's mind that these large centres all started off as tiny independent rehabbers, and also keeping in mind that the huge centres who do a fantastic work, a huge amount of the animals that don't go to large centres get taken in by independent rehabbers. And there does seem like an outsider who's not a rehabber within the industry, they are absolutely codependent. And a small independent rehabber can operate at an incredibly high standard. They're just a small version of a large centre, to the point that they can have such a close working relationship with the vet that it's collaborative. And there's like equal levels of knowledge, care, resources. It's just on a much smaller scale. So it's really part of the benefit of being a badge for a small rehabber is really being celebrated and recognized for that. So there's two levels of benefits. One are the exclusive kind of individual benefits that rescues have. So the first thing is kind of as I suggested. So if it's a smaller rehabber, an independent home-based rehabber getting the wildlife care badge, it's really celebrating their standards and recognizing them for the high level professionals that they are, which is really important. There's also, we've also wanted, right from the very beginning of development, we wanted to create a space for care badge holders where they could discuss wildlife treatments and pros and cons of stuff that could sometimes be controversial and get quite emotional in debate, but in a space where there's a lot of trust already, because it's all badge holders who've proven standards. So they've already proven that they have the same mindset, the same minimum standards. So it's a space that encourages even quite heavy debate, because everyone is already united on a certain level. So it creates more trust. So we're actually holding meetings for badge holders if they wanted to put topics to the table on certain medical treatments or certain opinions on various types of rehab, so that they can be debated within a safe space to improve wildlife welfare. And then the overall benefits, recognizing that all badge holders really pioneers within the wildlife rescue industry. So we all came together and we developed the badge. But if it wasn't for the badge holders, our first wave of badge holders who signed up and who are the examples, who are putting themselves up there as the examples, the wildlife care badge would just be a dream. It would just be an idea. It wouldn't happen. So badge holders, by signing up, are having this massive overall effect over the long term, which is they're being an example to create much higher standards of care for casualties within the industry. They're forming a community that is continuing to grow of rehabbers who can trust one another. And within that space, we also in the future looking to initiate a pooling of data and experiences and insights to enable more knowledge within the industry that everyone can share. There's all of these different benefits that are humans and wildlife alike, we think.
Which is incredible. I mean, that's an amazing amount of benefits that people can get from doing it. I think one thing that is really important, a lot of the small rehabbers are quite often on their own or in a very small area. And for them to be not only acknowledged as being professional in the work that they're doing and how much difference that work makes, they do an incredible job and always to their best of their ability. But I can also see there is a huge benefit in having a safe space amongst those care badge holders where in future, and I don't know where you're going, you could talk about specific diseases in certain animals or across species even, and really move things on, because you've got a room full of experts who are in a safe space, who are okay to talk about how they handle the care and treatment, which kind of leads me on to the next thing, because it's critical. And I think it's a part of everything that you do, that people work with a vet, not necessarily their own vet. It could be a local vets that are independent. And I do know that vets and vet nurses in general really give an awful lot of their time, energy, and effort to help wildlife and rehabbers. Is there anything with the vets that you feel that you could, as a wildlife care badge holder or as a group, that you can?
Do we support rehabbers to work with vets, do you mean?
Yeah.
We do, as much as we can. We recognised early on. So one of the requirements of being a badge holder is absolutely having to work with a vet, for a number of reasons that do also reflect the reality of the situation, which is that the majority of vets have incredibly little wildlife training, and the majority of rehabbers know more about wildlife rehab than a vet. So it does need to be recognised that there is this dichotomy, there is this divide, and yet they are two incredibly complementary professionals and professions. When united, that's what enables the real high welfare care of an animal. So our badge holders need to work with a vet because of a legal requirement. It's absolutely a legal requirement. It's not even legal, actually, for a rehabber to use the word diagnose. They're not legally allowed. Only a vet is allowed to diagnose. Obviously, the reality is that it's like an assessment is like you can put different words in it. But the benefits of a rehabber working with a vet is all the standard stuff that we would think of for humans with doctors, or ourselves with our pets. So having access to all the right medications, because veterinary professionals have a huge amount of training on the pharmaceuticals and what's required. They have a large medical background knowledge that rehabbers generally don't have. So they bring all of that to the table, and the wildlife rehabbers bring their own very specific wildlife knowledge, all of their training, all of their experience. And then through the vet, they can access the right medications, the right diagnostic tools, the tests that are required, the operations that are required, the right level of pain relief and antibiotics, which are absolutely essential. So it's very much like a partnership in harmony when rehabbers and vets have a good working relationship. And we try and support that as much as possible, because the reality is that rehabbers can, especially small independent rehabbers, can be trying to do everything absolutely perfectly, and they really struggle to get support from a local vet practice. And then it can be vice versa. Vet practice, because it's an unregulated industry, vet practices can feel that when they get wildlife in, they don't know where they can safely pass an animal to. So they struggle as well. So we're trying to really bridge that gap and create an actual nationwide structure that holds everyone. But obviously it's a massive work in progress. But we've been holding groups for the last 2 years, one for rehabbers and vet professionals together to chat about how to have good working relationships. And we've had great examples kind of turn up that have been presented to create templates. And we've got all sorts of paperwork and blogs and stuff to try and enable people to copy certain relationships and get started. And then we have a group just for vet professionals that was started because there's a wonderful rescue in Nottingham that was set up by vet professionals who rehabbed as well in their own time. And they ended up setting up their own rescue across Nottingham. And because they were all in vet professionals in practice as well as rehabbing outside of practice, they started offering support to other vet practices who weren't as wildlife trained in Nottingham, and they had a really big impact. And I noticed this and thought, that's a really, could that be copied? Could that be an opportunity to copy? So that's something that we're trying to support, because there's no point trying to push a wildlife rehabber to have a great vet relationship and tick all the boxes if it's not their fault that they can't bridge it. So it's really trying to focus on the reality of the situation and support as much as possible to enable it in every way that we can.
Yeah, that's amazing, because it is so vital, that relationship. And of course, it's completely independent. I wasn't aware of that particular initiative in Nottingham, but that is really the way forward, isn't it? The bigger ones have the advantage of having vets on site, which is obviously one solution to the problem. You have your own vets, which is great, but that's not realistic for the vast majority of wildlife rescues, rehabs, and not every vet wants to deal with wildlife or will deal with it. I can see, it's going to take some time to pull all these things together, but amazing strides that you've made in a relatively short amount of time. And clearly rehabbers are getting on board with this. And it's another benefit that this is just going to keep driving those standards higher, but more importantly, the treatment and care of the animals, which is everybody's ultimate aim is to make it better. So I can really see that. So if I wanted to take the wildlife care badge course, how would I do it? And roughly how long does it take? Go through the process? Is it online or is it in person?
It's actually quite easy to get the badge if you're already operating at that standard, which, to be honest, like a lot of rehabbers are. They're already absolutely doing everything. It's more about celebrating that they're doing it, if I'm honest. So that's how we see it. So it's just 2 steps to getting the badge and a third step to maintaining it, I suppose. One is a knowledge assessment, which is just on Zoom. We do intakes every quarter. So we're having intakes in April, and then our next intake is July. The knowledge assessment is just, it was drafted by Liz Molyneux, who's top wildlife vet. It's multiple choice. It's all based on answers that can only be definitive. So there's no questions that are opinion. So you can't kind of be penalized for having a different opinion. You just jump on Zoom. I oversee them generally. It's kind of like an exam space on Zoom where like I can see them and like they show that their phone is somewhere else and they're not good, like really basic stuff. And then they just log into a bit of software that we use that gives them access to the multiple choice questions. And it's an hour to do one species and 90 minutes if you're doing more than one. And then there's different sections. All of this info is under knowledge assessments on the Wildlife Care Badge website. But there's different sections like biosecurity, triage, legislation, but it's very open. It's very calm. People can apply to do it anonymously. So it's just me and them in the rooms that no one on Zoom, like just on our session, so that no one else has to know they're doing it until they've passed. If they don't pass a section, they just reset. There's no judgment. If someone doesn't pass a session, it's not because they're not an amazing rehabber. Like multiple choice questions catch them out. And also the fact it's not really been possible to create a course, like a massive course, and then people know what they have to know, what they have to revise, and then there's certain questions that are going to come up. They're just being thrown in with no idea of what to expect. So generally, most people need to reset at least one section, but at no point does that mean they're not an amazing rehabber. It just means that within their knowledge base, there was some stuff that is strengths and weaknesses, and that's it. So they just go through that step. And then the next step is just a veterinary visit, either from their vet or a vet nurse who works with their vet, which is just a checklist, which is again put together by Liz Molyneux. And then there are questions as well that were put together by other wildlife vets to help the vet who's a veterinary professional who's visiting know what to ask. So know to look for predator and prey not being together, know to look for like different biosecurity, stuff like that. And that's just checked off. But that's meant to be it's not a visit, inspect and judge. It's again very much meant to be within the supportive theme of like occasionally the vet staff who visited us said, "What have you thought about moving this over here or moving this over here?" And it's very much been collaborative. And then once we have that, they have the badge. It's slightly different for if you have a centre or if you're a hub where you pass animals out to fosterers, but all that information is on the website. It really doesn't, in terms of hours, it's probably 4 or 5 hours max, maybe even 2 hours if it's speedy to get the badge. It's just ticking off those couple of steps. And then maintaining the badge is just proving an ongoing level of welfare, which is proving that you're keeping admission records, proving that you're keeping treatment plans with medications, that kind of stuff, and proving that you have an ongoing relationship with a vet, all of which is the paperwork that people are already keeping. And we just need to see proof of it once every quarter, which takes about 5 minutes on a Google form we've created. And each badge holder is allocated a member of the committee to look after them, to be like, do you want help with your accountability? Do you want me to help you use this form, and to provide support? So we try and make it as open and as supportive a space as possible, and people can just apply it on the website, and then I take it from there.
Fantastic. It sounds like just a really supportive community that is trying to get everybody up to the standards, but in a way that you're supporting them at every stage of that journey, which is important. So a lot of wildlife rescues have volunteers that come in, some multiple days, some one day a week. But could they come and do the care badge?
Yeah. So with the knowledge assessment, there's requirements and then there's an optional way of going about it. So there's two labels really. One is supervised and then unsupervised staff or volunteers. So if there's a badge holder who then has a staff member or a volunteer who would come under unsupervised, which means that they're kind of triaging on their own, they're making medical decisions, they're deciding if it's going to go to a vet, they're operating kind of independently, then they need to pass the knowledge assessment as well for the rescue as a whole to get a badge, because so like knowledge is assured across all levels. And then anyone who comes under supervised, so like protocols in place, they get advice, they get told what to do, they just kind of do the work. They don't have to sit because they're coming under the supervision of someone who's proven their knowledge. However, quite a lot of badge holders are choosing to invite their staff and volunteers who are supervised to do the knowledge assessment, just to start finding out about their own strengths and weaknesses. And that's proving really successful, actually, and really nice. And some badge holders are choosing that when they get new volunteers on board, it's a requirement to do it as part of kind of setting themselves up to the right mindset and knowing enough to really be of use. And then we provide certificates for everyone who passes. So it's really about celebration and support and helping people to find their strengths and weaknesses, because there isn't really a structure in place. There's some great courses from rescues like Secret World, but for what we're doing, there isn't some great overarching course. So there will be strengths and weaknesses. So it's about all of us working together to do the best that we can in a way that's celebratory and supportive.
So when you were setting up the wildlife care badge, how much were the standards of wildlife care actually being discussed at that time?
It's really interesting, actually, because there was definitely general phrases that were going around when I first realized kind of the level of lack of regulation through transporters, and having lots of conversations with the rehabbers. There was a lot of conversations like, oh, it would be great if there were regulation, or we really need regulation, or licensing needs to come in, and all this kind of stuff. But what we found in developing the badge is that we seem to have been the driving force. Seem to have been like it's important that I say that, because like it's absolutely a matter of opinion. But we seem to have been the driving force in really raising the conversation and really highlighting and putting a spotlight on it, and then really starting to set up a structure that recognizes it on a level that hadn't been done before. And we've seen other organizations definitely start to at least talk about it. Maybe they were talking about it loads still in the background, and but publicly, we feel that publicly we've definitely raised the issue in a way that wasn't perhaps happening before. And we certainly appear, it's important I say appear, because again, it is opinion, and it may be that there was all sorts of stuff going on that I'm not aware of, but we certainly appear to have been at the forefront and the driving force of bringing this about. And we've seen other organizations kind of start to use the same language and seem to follow our lead. Again, they may have been doing this loads of stuff in the background, and it all was just simultaneous, but it's definitely all seems to have raised significantly since we first started chatting about it. Maybe we were just helpful in bringing it more into the public awareness, but it's been really rewarding.
Absolutely. And it's really important to change anything. You've got to get a public debate going, and it's great if other people are picking up on that message.
Yeah, we're really excited about it, and we have really big hopes for it, and we're growing. We're getting new badge holders, and our community's growing, but a huge amount of it is still very much opening up that discussion. It's all still really new, even though we've just had our second anniversary since our launch. It's still absolutely we're in our infancy. in really just opening up this conversation more, we're finding.
Yes, and hopefully people listening today will come and check out your website. And for those involved in rehabbing, register to go on and do the wildlife care badge. People can follow you on social media, your wildlife care badge on Facebook, and they can go to the website, which is www.wildlifecarebadge.com. So please do go along there, and if you can, register and get yourself signed up for the next intake, and they are quarterly. So I know in other countries they actually have regulation for their wildlife rescues. How do your standards compare with that?
We're really pleased, actually. So Scotland have obviously recently brought in licensing. They're still very much introducing it, but it's fantastic that they're doing it. And from the steps that I'm aware of that rehabbers are required to take in Scotland, we reflect that quite well. But strangely, I know slightly less about that than I do about regulation in America, only because recently we were really lucky to have a webinar run through the Wildlife Care Badge by a member of the IWRC, specifically talking about a regulation in America and how their rescue operates and what they have to meet and the standards they have to have and what they have to tick off. And it was an absolutely wonderful, incredible experience to get to attend that webinar and listen to Hallie speak, because it was genuinely as though she was speaking our thoughts all the way through development and our goals all the way through development and all the reasons that we felt the badge was important, and then going through all the standards and the way that it operates over there was incredibly similar on a level that I don't think we'd even anticipated to the badge. The fact that we were talking about it afterwards amongst ourselves, the people who run the badge, and we were just talking about how amazing it was that we really had created this structure, that so many people had come together and created this structure that was on such a level with what Hallie had been describing from her state in America. And it was so much, the language was so similar, the tick boxes, the targets, the level of support, what was required, it was almost identical in lots of ways. Obviously there are bits that were different, but it was a real boost to be like, actually, maybe we've done a good job of this. Maybe this is good. Because, with any project you can have highs and lows, but it was a real boost. It was really nice.
It is so important that when you set out to do something, especially when it's never been done before, and you kind of get some validation that other people are maybe ahead, but they've gone down the same track, that the fact that you've got there independently, but you're on the right track is so reassuring, isn't it? So we like to ask everyone on the Wildlife Matters podcast a couple of questions. They're general questions just to help people understand a little bit more about you and maybe even find out some secrets. Who knows? So, Alana, what is your favourite pastime and why?
I don't really know if I've got a favourite. I really like wild swimming. I'm really lucky to live by the water, I live on Anglesey, which is a lot of beaches and a lot of immense beauty. And I'm very lucky to be close to the water. So wild swimming is huge for me. I absolutely love it. And I'm pretty dependent on it. I love being just out amongst woodlands and on beaches and amongst lots of different creatures and just being outside and out and about and part of the world, if that makes sense. Just I don't know, barefoot on the beach and pottering up mountains and swimming in seas and lakes and campfires. Big fan of campfires and roasted marshmallows and all sorts of lovely stuff like that. That's me, I suppose.
Sounds absolutely wonderful. And yes, and as somebody who also just loves being outside and particularly in woodlands and wild swimming and things, I completely get what you're saying there. It's a way of connecting with nature. The other one, we might be leading to something here with the love of swimming, but if you had to describe yourself as an animal, which one would you be and why?
Do you know my first thing that's popped into my head with that but I will give a second answer as well, was a human animal, which I know isn't really like the answer, but that was the first thing that sprang up since we are animals. So that was the first answer. So I'll give that. Second one, if I was a non-human animal, yeah, I think I'd quite fancy being a seal. I see seals in the water outside my house a lot, and I find them fascinating. And if I had there's so many to pick, isn't there? But there you go. I'm just going to pick that one.
Seals are always wanting to know what you're doing if you're in the water. So, yeah, they've got, I suppose, like an element of my nature. I love to ask questions, and seals seem to do that, but in a non-verbal way. But they still communicate it really well. And our final question, which we do ask everyone, is: what is the one thing that needs to change to help wildlife rescue in Britain, and how likely is it to change in the next 5 years?
I think it's mindset. I think it's the mindset of humans within the industry recognizing how amazing they are and celebrating themselves, because that enables, not only is that so important in its own right, but it enables the celebration of one another on a much greater scale. Open-minded and open-heartedness of celebrating all creatures. And I think from within that space, everything becomes more grounded, more open, communication becomes a lot easier, and welfare for everyone becomes, I suppose, a more fluidly recognized state of being. The state of celebration is the state in which well-being is most easily achieved for everyone. It's an incredibly boosting and enabling state of being. So I think it's that. I think it's the mindset of celebrating how incredible we all are, the wonder that we all are, that we don't even think about most of the time, because that opens up an amazing relationship with ourselves, and then an amazing relationship with all others. So I think that would be my answer.
And that is the perfect way to wind up our chat today. Thank you, Alana, for your time and for being on the Wildlife Matters podcast. Wow, it was really interesting to chat with Alana today and hear about the amazing work that she and her growing band of certified wildlife badge carers are doing for the benefit of wildlife across the UK. If you work or volunteer in a wildlife rescue, you can sign up for the next course intake in July 2024. You can find out more at www.wildlifecarebadge.com. That's www.wildlifecarebadge.com. Additionally, you can follow them on Facebook, where they're known as a Wildlife Care Badge. Please consider donating to one of the wildlife rescues with the Wildlife Care Badge approval. A complete list of these rescues is available on the website. Thank you. So if you've enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and follow us on your podcast platform of choice. And of course, we're on all the social media channels as Wildlife Matters. And Wildlife Matters will return with our Q&A special in 2 weeks' time. Thank you for your time and for choosing to listen to us today. My name is Nigel Palmer, and this is Wildlife Matters signing off.